Welcome to CTO Think, a podcast about leadership, product development, and tech decisions between two recovering chief technology officers. Here are your hosts, Don Vandemark and Randy Burgess.
This week, we have a guest. I'd like to introduce everyone to April Wensel. She is the founder of Compassionate Coding, which is described from her website, a conscious business helping technical teams cultivate sustainable, human-centered software development practices built on a foundation of emotional intelligence. So welcome to the show, April.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's just dive right into the description. What is Compassionate Coding and what is the mission? What are you hoping to achieve with the practice, and at a greater scale, what are we looking to improve in the technology leadership realm?
Yeah, so at a high level, Compassionate Coding is really about humanizing the tech industry. And more specifically, my way to accomplish that is teaching emotional intelligence and related kind of competencies to software engineers, just because of the role, the strong role that they play in the tech industry. I feel like we can make a lot of change by changing how software engineers specifically work, including people involved in engineering leadership as well. But yeah, I started Compassionate Coding after 10 years of working in the tech industry as a software engineer and engineering leader. And I saw a lot of gaps in terms of where people, there was a lot of stress and burnout was a problem. I saw projects failing because of communication issues. You look around and you see the lack of inclusion and diversity in the tech industry. It's hard to miss that. And of course, building unethical products and products that take advantage of people. So combined all together, the common denominator there is just a lack of concern for human beings and the human element. And so that's what Compassionate Coding is really about, is bringing the human element to the focus in the tech industry. Makes
perfect sense. So you have a blog post. Like, I guess I saw one of your talks at NG Atlanta, and you made the statement from the beginning. Like, you apologize a bit for, hey, this is soft stuff. But
I wouldn't say I apologize.
Well, yeah, it was more of you were just saying that this is not about code. This is about the emotional, the people side of things, which, for whatever reason, a lot of leaders in our industry still don't get that that's an important piece. What moved you into this focus in your career? Because you worked as both a coder and a leader. You've been on both sides of the fence. What moved you into focusing on this?
Yeah, so part of why I started my talk that way is because I used empathy and knew that people in the audience would be resistant to something like this. And so I thought it would be better to anticipate it. I really don't see there being a fence, to be honest, between leadership and coding. I see these are just a set of skills out there, and people have different degrees of experience in all these skills. So I don't consider myself like, oh, I used to be a coder and then I was a manager and then now, I'm a coach or something. It's more like, no, like I still code. I still, I feel like even individual contributors have an opportunity to lead projects, to lead, their own career even. So I see these leadership skills as being kind of more widespread and more applicable than most people give them credit for. So for me, it was just a natural progression of I saw a problem in the industry. I wanted to solve it. I didn't feel like it was, I was making a change in terms of my role. It was just being able to use even more skills, basically.
Makes sense. For the way that I learned about you online was through Twitter, which is always a scary place to ever meet anybody, I think. But I basically made a comment out loud before I realized there was this huge, I guess, the pushback on the way Stack Overflow and how they treat new developers. And because I have a bunch of students that I taught last year in a boot camp, and I would say to them, you should definitely go to Stack Overflow to find answers. but you should not go there to ask questions. And it was around the lack of empathy that the moderators had, the lack of of consideration that was going on for people in our industry. So I guess I just want to focus on that one item. You were making a pretty big statement, which I agree with, on Stack Overflow. How do you see that experience and how the Stack Overflow experience relates to how some teams are running poorly with handling the emotional side of software development?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Stack Overflow, I feel like it's such a great example of kind of this hostility toward people asking for help that is just so widespread. It's just such, a lot of times I say that ego is the biggest problem in tech, and I do believe that's the case. And so I think you see that at play on Stack Overflow. Like the moderators, some of them, and even just people answering questions, they're motivated, sure, some of them to help people, but a lot of times it's more about, winning those points, those reputation points, and trying to look smart. And, and that's how the site was designed, I mean, even in Joel Spolsky's recent retrospective, he said, we wanted a site where developers could show how smart they were, it's like it was designed that way. So Stack Overflow is a great example of that. But we see it all the time in teams. I mean, Google they had this Project Aristotle recently where they found, what makes for successful teams. And they identified this key element, which was psychological safety. And I think the reason that's so important, and that's the idea that, you can make mistakes on the team and you won't be ostracized, you feel safe to make mistakes and to learn. And I think that the reason that's so important they called that out is that's just so missing from most of the tech industry. It's like, if you make a mistake, you're potentially seen as incompetent. And you just, because ego again is so central, it's like, oh, I don't want to seem. So you hide mistakes, right? A lot of times that happens on teams is people hide mistakes because they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to be shamed in the industry, because shame, again, is really what happens the most on Stack Overflow, is just people trying to say, oh, how could you not have found this answer for yourself? You should be ashamed, I wrote a blog post specifically about Stack Overflow. Somebody commented whoever wrote this should be ashamed, and everybody who's liking it should be ashamed. I was like, okay, you're kind of making my point for me.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing about the internet and Twitter is that people can be anonymous, and they get a little more, I guess, they get a little more juice to feel protected when they knock others. But Stack Overflow actually identifies the people, and so the culture is completely not anonymous, but the people still act the same in some cases, which is even interesting. And it's also the irony of it all is you mentioned Spolsky. Fog Creek for years was one of the top software companies that talked about this stuff. They basically, anything you would read from Spolsky in the past talked about the people side of software development. Yet they created a tool that has grown into this completely heartless type of mechanism for users. So I think it's interesting how it evolved, and it didn't really evolve the best way. So have you heard from the Stack Overflow founder or the people running it about, because I know a blog post came out later by one of their managers about recognizing there's some things that need to change. I don't know if you've heard more on this.
Yeah, a few people at the company in leadership have publicly thanked me for writing the blog post and for calling these issues out. So that's been nice. And the blog post they wrote was encouraging, that they do want to make Stack Overflow more welcoming. But I would say it's interesting, although Joel Spolsky has always been, writing about the people side of development and all of that, I will say that you see a lot of the seeds of the culture in some of his older blog posts that talk about this differentiation between the mediocre engineers and the really good engineers, and that some people will just never be good engineers. And that's the elitism that we see happening on Stack Overflow. So although Fog Creek in some ways was progressive, I would say also they put some things in the culture that are maybe not the most healthy and that we still do have to overcome. But I just wanted to clarify that because I think what's dangerous is that people still pass around Joel's articles and to some extent the other founder, Jeff Atwood, as if they're like, the gospel, right? They're shared around like, oh, this is how you do it. And things, they got a lot of things, right. But they also, showed that they didn't really have the key empathy piece early on. Yeah. So I think it's important to read those with, a filter and like kind of in a critical sort of way. Well, but yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was totally agreeing with you. I think that those folks, including people like Uncle Bob, are all from an old guard. And it's not that some of their insights aren't right on about how to be a quality developer, but the culture that they were a part of is not something that we're trying to keep in place. We're not trying to have just a bunch of alpha males run everything and be the only part. And that's where they came. That's where they grew up. And so I think it's fine to call out like, hey, you guys were right about this, but we need to change some of the sentiments coming out of what you said before. So
yeah, for sure.
So kudos on taking that on, because I know anybody, not just women, but anyone that stands up to a community the size of a Stack Overflow is going to get blowback, especially on a medium like Twitter. So I applaud what you're trying to do there, because I want it to be a place that my students can ask questions and maybe accidentally write a duplicate question without suddenly getting closed and shut down. And instead being like, hey, we know you're trying to learn, and we're going to have a process for you to ask questions when you don't know how to actually search for them at this point. Because that's usually the hardest part in that. But
well, April, let me jump in here real quick. Based on some of the reading I did on your blog, I do want to talk a little bit about history, right? So and learning from experiences. So based on some readings I was doing on your blog, you didn't come to this necessarily. This hasn't been your mode from day one. There's been some learnings along the way as well, as far as within your own career. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, about how you got to this place?
Yeah, for sure. So that's something I've started talking about a lot, because I think it helps people to see that, we're all kind of on a learning journey here. But yeah, so I have this blog post that I wrote about how I used to be kind of a jerk programmer. And I say it pretty openly because I think it's beneficial to talk about these things openly. And basically what I mean is just the way the industry is set up, you can go through it being pretty rough around the edges and being kind of ignoring how you're affecting people emotionally, and you're still rewarded. Like, even though I was, pretty direct, but not just direct, but direct without any sort of consideration for people's feelings. And yet, I would keep getting, doing well, keep getting hired. I never got really much pushback for that. And I think that I just had to come to some, I came to an awareness on my own of just, I'm not happy being this way. Like, I don't like who I am to succeed in this industry. I don't like that I have to be aggressive and that I have to be, so competitive, which I really have been really competitive. And I thought, because I also teach kids to code, and I teach other adults to code too. And it just, when I was in those modes, it was just so much more pleasant, when everybody's just supportive and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to admit you don't know something. It was just a totally different environment. And so I was like, why can't all of tech be like this? Like, there's no inherent reason why tech can't be like this. So, I did a lot of personal growth on my own, which one thing that helped me there was doing personal retrospectives. So kind of like agile retrospectives for teams, but for myself, where I reflected regularly on what was important to me and how I was meeting those goals and what I could do differently. And so I made changes, and I learned emotional intelligence, certain aspects of it. And so I realized that it was a teachable skill. A lot of times there's this myth like, oh, programmers just aren't good with people. And so that kind of, they have no responsibility to be, to treat people decently. And it's just, that's just nonsense. It's just ridiculous. You can learn these skills. And I've worked with people all across the spectrum, of emotional intelligence skills, and using the growth mindset, no matter where you're starting, you can always get better. So it may take time, it may take practice, but people can make gains in, improving their communication skills, no matter where they're starting from.
Sure. So I wanted to set that background just so that everybody had that understanding that this is something that can be learned, and in general, in your career and in life, if something's not going the right way, you can change your whole viewpoint on it. It's and that because we're talking about something that some people would consider a little soft, I want to make sure we framed it just right, that this is not something that can't be learned from experience. So I thought it was real important to get that out there.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. It is something that can be learned. And, I don't really like this term soft, because I feel like people use it to dismiss things.
Yes.
Like why would you want to do anything soft if, there's this hard thing that you really should be doing? And so I generally try to avoid that, because, again, these skills, you can learn them systematically. I mean, that's what I teach in the workshops that I do. We actually break down some of the psychology here, and it's actually, and there are frameworks you can use, and it's actually, takes a lot of focus and a lot of effort, and they're definitely, and it's not always soft as in, you're going around being fake nice to people either. That's really not what emotional intelligence is either. And I think sometimes soft gives that impression that it's oh, everyone's just happy and smiley all the time. And that's not really it either, because to really communicate well, you sometimes do have to be very direct with people, but emotional intelligence just gives you strategies for presenting it in a way where it's going to be heard, it's going to be received, more likely than, if you just come in here and say, oh, well, your code sucks and this sucks and that, you know what I mean? So you can still be direct. So in that sense too, it's not always soft. Sometimes, if you look at my criticism of Stack Overflow, I have to say, I think I was pretty fiercely compassionate there. I don't think I was soft by any means.
No. Well, on the track of learning, and you just mentioned workshops, if a company, if a business leader wants to make a change, where how does your program work? What can someone expect if you come into a company and you are teaching what compassionate coding is about? What do they do day one? How does your process work? What can someone expect, I guess?
Yeah. So, my philosophy is that people will only change if they see how that change will benefit themselves. So a lot of times I think training at tech companies, or just at companies in general, is here's what you need to do because this is the rule and this is what you have to do. And I just feel like those just don't work. Yeah. And I know as an engineer, I would tune out most trainings that I had to do that had nothing to do with code. So I use that knowledge. I start from that. So I start by presenting, the benefits to the individuals and to the company and everything, and kind of making the case for it. And that's something that a lot of times because there's, traditional emotional intelligence programs out there that are meant for managers and stuff like that. But they don't always, they don't really frame it in a way where it's okay, I'm a software engineer. What does this have to do with what, my work? Yeah. So that's kind of one of the biggest things, is just getting people motivated, because that's the way to win them over. Right. So usually what happens is I'll speak with somebody in leadership, and we'll talk about the issues on the team, things they'd like to see improvement on. And for every engagement that I do, I design a custom training schedule. So I don't just have a set kind of deck that I run through and, oh, this is the training. Mm-hmm. I really try to understand what's going to appeal most to the audience that I'm dealing with. And how to make the metaphors that resonate with them, and understand the values of their specific culture and all of that. So I work with them, come up with a kind of a customized workshop program. And then I come on site and work with the team. And it usually works best when you can get as many people of the team in the room as possible, just so we can make big changes. But it's just a really interactive session. So we do practice like reframing conversations, understanding when you've had like an emotional episode, kind of breaking it down and understanding like what it means, and how to use it productively. And so it's a really kind of interactive, fun kind of experience. I try to keep it engaging because, again, like that's something that because engineers aren't used to talking about this stuff, it really has to be engaging to keep their attention.
So you've been doing this about 2 years now. Is it May of 2016? So what have you, like, after you've gone into a company that has at least bought into the need to change, what have you seen on the other side? What have you seen the positive effects of making changes like this in a team culture?
Yeah, and that's been kind of the most magical piece of it, is just kind of seeing, because a lot of this is really just low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's like I'll go in and somebody will say something like, you know, how do I show this customer that they're wrong? You know, because it's somebody doing open source, and I'm just like, okay, let's take a step back from even phrasing it that way. And it's like the very basic stuff. And so then you give them these tools, right? And then I'll hear from the manager like, oh yeah, you know, I've been bringing this up in the one-on-one, and I'm seeing progress with so-and-so and all this stuff. And so, you know, it's the kind of thing where it's hard to quantify sometimes. I mean, I certainly do surveys and you can see like how attitudes change and whatnot, but a lot of it's this just really intangible stuff that makes people, it makes the team run more smoothly, you know? And so hearing those anecdotes, hearing those stories about how, you know, how the jerk on the team that used to be like my thing, like how they've started to be more open about, you know, what they are really thinking about and why they're behaving the way they are. I mean, those are the things that really keep me going, is just being able to hear those little stories of how people's lives are changing. And of course, it's affecting the bottom line, right? Because like if people are working together better, you're going to get things done faster and everything.
So another tale from Twitter, because that's a good place for conversation. Sometimes the conversation isn't great, but it certainly brings up conversation topics. There was a post someone made about that they think job hopping portrays a negative example to them, and there was a bit of backlash that job hopping can also indicate that the workplace wasn't healthy, and that they need to move on because it wasn't a healthy environment. But I've found more satisfaction in the last 5 years when I've had 3 or 4 different jobs than in the 14 I worked at IBM. So I completely get the mindset of it's time to find something else, especially if you're in a situation that's not a good situation. So I saw those Twitter posts go out, and I'm like, no, I gotta get in on this one. Cause I do think that you've got to find what's right for you. And you need to especially get out of something that's not right for you.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. Yeah, that conversation was interesting. I think like in a number of different ways. Like I've had maybe like 10 jobs or something over my 10 years in tech. Like I hopped around quite a bit, and I don't see it as a problem. Like I quit when I was unhappy. I found something new. I learned a bunch. It's actually part of why I was able to start my company, is I got such a range of experience at like so many different types of places, like research labs, like big companies, small companies. And so it was really good market research. I didn't know it at the time to start my company. So, you know, I think that we can make gains by improving the culture, but it's really time to recognize that some people are going to want to move on to, you know, do something new, to expand their horizons. And I think that companies can do things to make that transition easier, you know, to have mentoring programs so that it's easier to onboard people. I think that, you know, I don't think the goal is like to keep people as long as you possibly can. It's more like, yeah, provide a healthy culture, but also when people want to move on, wish them well, you know, and help them make that transition too.
So April, what can we take away from this conversation? What are some things to go do moving forward if we all want to improve?
Yeah. So I think one way is through reframing, just literally the terminology we use, like not using soft skills, for example. So, in the past, I've talked about using catalytic skills with the idea that these skills kind of help catalyze your use of other skills, and the application of them, and acquiring them. So that's one, is just kind of how you frame it. But really, I think to motivate people, is to really be persuasive, is to find out, like, what are the problems that these people are facing? Because they're certainly facing problems. If they're completely ignoring this, then they're definitely facing problems. And those problems might be that they're burning out, that they're stressed, that they're frustrated with their coworkers. That's a big one. Like if people, especially like engineers dealing with non-engineers, if they're frequently frustrated, like, oh, the stupid marketing person, blah, 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 or, the product manager just doesn't understand, like things like that. So if you get them to start talking about their problems, then you can talk about how these emotional intelligence skills help solve those problems. So that's one of the easiest ways in, is to find the pain points. And that's really why my company is called Compassionate Coding, is because compassion is really about minimizing suffering. And so that's really about eliminating pain points. So you find out what the pain points are, give them a path to alleviate them. And then the other way, I think, to address the skeptics is really with the data, because there have been studies out there of like what makes a successful software engineer. Even as like in 1994, there was this paper that came out like about the essential competencies of software engineers. And the top three they listed was like team oriented, the person seeks help, and the person helps others. And so those are all, quote, soft skills, or these emotional intelligence skills. Like I mentioned, Project Aristotle by Google, that's a newer one where they found how important psychological safety is and all these things. So I think, back in 2015, the Application Developers Alliance did a study of like what causes software projects to fail. And the top ones they found were all kind of people related things, and only like way on the end was like, immature dev tools or things like that. And so when you can point to data too, I feel like that can really help people see that the reason projects are failing, the reason projects are late, the reason, people are so unhappy and burning out is because we've been ignoring these skills for like most of the, duration of the existence of the industry.
So the name of your company, Compassionate Coding, leads one to believe this is an IT problem. Is this IT only, or is this more, you see this in any company across all divisions?
Yeah, it's hard to say because tech now is part of most businesses. And so you can't really isolate it. And I think the reason people focus on tech, or at least one reason, is that we're trying to be, move the needle, push the boundaries there and whatever, to lead the way, do the cutting edge stuff. And so if we're going to do that in general in tech, then it'd be nice if we can also do it in this realm. But yeah, I think a lot of these things affect the business world in general. Healthcare is one industry that at least has done more research in this area, because, compassion, for example, there is it's much easier to sell people on the idea of caring about that in the healthcare industry. But they still have, a long way to go as well. You still have issues with like doctors burning out and things like that. So they still have some issues, but they are at least more mindful of it, I think, than we are. But I would love the tech industry to lead the way, I really would, because we lead the way in other, ways. And so why not in this one?
This is all really good. What does the future hold for this movement, and more specifically, compassionate coding? Yeah,
so I travel around quite a bit giving these workshops and speaking, and there's only one of me, and so I don't really have the desire to kind of train the trainer and get other people to, just because the message is so important to me, and I just don't want it to get diluted. So what I'm looking to do is scale out by putting a lot of this online. So having some online materials, online courses that can help people acquire these skills. Because I get requests all the time from people like, oh, are you going to do a workshop in my town, like a public one I can go to? And it's just like, I just can't do that. So I'm like, I think the way to reach more people is really to get this material online. And as far as like long term, I want compassionate coding rebrand it, whatever, however it goes through the years. I mean, as I got used to in tech, I'm all about the pivots and the whatnot. But really, I want this to be a new approach to software development. Like I want it to, what Agile did, I want that to be what compassionate coding does. Instead of saying, what's the lean thing to do? What's the Agile thing to do? I want it to be, what's the compassionate thing to do in this scenario? I want that to be, the thing that comes off everybody's lips, when they're discussing the projects. That's really the goal, because I think that that's going to help us stop people from burning out. It's going to help our projects be more successful. It's going to help tech be more inclusive. We're going to get more diversity and inclusive. And it's going to keep us from building so many unethical products and using people's data unethically and all that. Because when we actually care about people, we're going to care about all people, including the people we're building the technology for.
I really like the compassionate coding brand. Just personally, when I saw you on Twitter and then I saw the name of your company, I was like, oh, I know what this is about. And so many names just don't really strike to what are you trying to do? And I asked a question on here, what are you trying to do? But I really understood. So April, if someone is sitting here listening and they don't know where to get started, they don't know the first thing they should do, what's some advice, or what can you recommend that someone that sees compassionate coding, they see a need, it doesn't have to be some big grandiose thing. Mm-hmm. What do you recommend people do to become a more compassionate coder, a more compassionate leader? And if they want to make this change, what's the first step in your mind that they should try to do?
So I think the first step, and this is going to be hard for engineers and people in tech who want to, go all the time. But I think that the best thing to do, the most important thing to do, is to just take a few moments and slow down. And what I mean by that is, even if it means 5 minutes at the end of the day, take 5 minutes, take 3 minutes if 5 minutes is too long, and just take a few quiet moments and look back at your day and think about the things that happened. Think about the people you interacted with, whether that was online, through Slack, or in person. And think, how did I behave in those situations? What were my emotions going on today? Because, we're human beings. We don't check our emotions at the door. We have them. So even just a few minutes of quiet reflection, looking back at your day, I think would be a great way to start. Because that's the thing, is most of us don't take that time at all. So we just kind of going all the time. Yeah. And we're just maybe steamrolling over people, not really caring what they're thinking. So I think if you can just take those few minutes, that's a great start. So that's really what I would recommend.
That's great advice. Don, what do you have?
Yeah, so thank you, April. I certainly appreciate you being on with us today. I think one takeaway I'm gonna work on is the rephrasing of the term soft skills. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna take that in a different direction. Would EQ skills be a good place to go with that?
I do. I think that would be a good one. I agree. I think that EQ skills is good. It might be a little more friendly to people than soft skills.
Okay. It's a learning I can take away. Randy?
Well, I guess the final question would be, how can people find you? If they want to hire you for their company, if you're going to be giving additional speeches, what's the best way for people to hear the message that you're providing? Yeah,
so I think the best way would be to sign up for my newsletter on compassionatecoding.com. I have a form there to sign up for my newsletter. I'm on Twitter at April Wensel, where that I'm active on Twitter, and yes. At Compassion Code. And I'll be doing the full emotional intelligence workshop at a Node Summit in San Francisco in July. It's a Node.js conference.
Awesome.
And I'll be at Pluralsight Live in August, and I've got a few other things in the works, so those will come out via the newsletter. So people just go to compassionatecoding.com, sign up for the newsletter. They'll be in the in crowd in terms of all this stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I truly believe in what the message that you are sending out there, the mission of compassionate coding. I run into so many developers that they will acknowledge how important the people side of this business is. Like, they're very smart engineers, and they understand it's not all about the code, but then they will scoff at any idea that compassion and empathy is a big piece of what they need to do. And I really hope that we can break through that. And I think programs like yours and the message and what you're saying online is going to get through and improve this industry on that side. Because I want my students to be able to enjoy a development job career that is improved from what we all have seen it to be. So again, thanks for being on and sharing this message. And I really look forward to what you have going forward.
I love that. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. This has been really fun. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, April.
We'll talk next week.
Thanks for listening to the CTO Think podcast. Show notes and previous episodes can be found on our website at ctothink.com. Reviews on Apple iTunes are always appreciated and help promote the show. Patreon contributions help us to produce episode transcripts, which allow people that are deaf or hard of hearing to access the show. If you have feedback, ideas, or want to be a guest, please email us at hello@ctothink.com. Show music is Dumpster Dive by Mark Wallach, licensed by PremiumBeat.com. Voiceover work by MeganVoices.com. You'll hear from us next week.